everyone. Welcome to another episode of Highlights. It's our 30th episode, and today we're lucky enough to have artist Hollis Hammonds here with us for a short interview. So, hi, Hollis. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. It's
Good.
beautiful spring weather today.
Yeah, the weather has been really nice lately.
So thanks for joining us for our interview today. We'll just go ahead and jump right in. I know that a lot of your work is kind of inspired by your past and a kind of traumatic experience that happened with a home fire. But I was wondering, what are some of your other biggest inspirations when it comes to your creative process?
Sure. And this will probably lead into your second question. We talked earlier about objects, but a lot of my work is about consumerism, and the American way. Like, we are a consumerist based culture. Um, it's part of our free enterprise, philosophy. And I think that there's good and bad things, right, about being consumers, about how we buy things, the type of things we buy. Things make us happy, but they can also be really toxic to the environment. I think right now, one example is during the pandemic, we're all sheltered at home, or we have been, at least at the beginning of the pandemic, and getting all of these packages delivered to our house. And this was already a problem, right? Because Prime is excellent. like Prime next day shipping is amazing. But all that waste and use and packaging, and it's so overwhelming. I grew up on kind of a farm. We didn't have like farm animals, but we had 2.5 acres of land in Kentucky, and we did have a lot of animals around, like mostly pets, dogs and cats and birds and fish. And my parents grew up during the Depression, and so they were a little bit older. And they had a propensity for not, it's kind of like stockpiling, but it wasn't, to that degree. They just saved everything, and they always had like canned goods in the cupboard, and every plastic jug or bottle that we ever used, my father saved. And he would turn into things like containers for tomatoes, or like we had a closet in our basement that was just filled with plastic, like plastic bags full of plastic bags, and like piles of plastic containers. So he would never throw anything away. He always had like a use for something. And this is way before recycling is a popular concept, like in a daily household. So, I don't know, all those little things definitely have been important for my work. I think a lot about what I own, what I purchase, what I throw away. And I think now with the environmental crisis just getting worse and worse, it's turned from sort of like personal obsession with stuff and personal responsibility to like this global epic, issue that affects everyone. And so that definitely is an inspiration for my work. In addition to that other stuff, like my house burning down.
I think that aspect of your work has to be a really interesting aspect, especially for a lot of people this past year particularly. something that I've been experiencing is that, like, I'm the kind of person that just never had really any money for spending. So when I did spend money, it was always on materials to make something.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always very careful about what materials I was choosing, and, what was I going to make with those materials? How often would I use it? Like cost per use, things like that. Um, but with staying home, not traveling, um, not doing certain things, and then the compensation from the government has made things really interesting for me, because I suddenly have a little bit of extra money. So it's like, it's been a really interesting experiment of like what I'm now choosing to do. And also the anxiety that comes from spending, period, after you've gone through such a long experience of not being able to spend, or having like such anxiety just built up about spending in general. So that's something that I really appreciate about your work, is because you're talking about very real things that
Mm-hmm.
everyone from every economical background can relate to in some form or fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody does that a lot. And you're saying so many things and having so many conversations simultaneously. And I think that's interesting because your work is so visually like dense. It's like a treasure hunt. It's like I
Mm-hmm.
spy whenever you're looking at everything. So you're trying to see everything for what it is within one image or one sculpture, and then have all of these different conversations that go along with it. So I just think that that's really neat. And not everyone does that the
Mm-hmm.
same way, or I
Mm-hmm.
just really appreciate the way that you have those conversations.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think that, I mean, by choosing to use everyday materials, like household items or furniture or personal objects, like I'm already connecting, like you said, I'm connecting with any viewer, because even if they don't own that object or haven't held it or experienced it or used it, it's like they understand what it's used for, or they they know where it comes from. Like most recently, I'm doing a project with a poet. Her name's Sasha West, and her work is all about basically the future apocalypse of our planet if we don't do something about the environment.
Right.
And she does it very eloquently by telling stories through multiple generations of a family, like
Mm-hmm.
a grandmother and a mother and a daughter and a granddaughter, and through their voices, like weaving together this interesting story of like the past and the present and the future that is kind of all over simultaneously overlapping. And I feel like, I mean, I try to do that with my work as well. I try to make the work timeless in a way, but it often feels nostalgic, because using like detritus or using household objects feels like history, right?
Right.
And it is. It's like stuff I've picked up off the street that belonged to someone
Mm-hmm.
that they're no longer using. It's not futuristic really in any way. But it also, like the work I'm doing now, maybe is even darker than the work I was doing previously, which was a little more playful, playful disasters. The work I'm doing now seems even more ominous and dark. All the objects are black or are painted black, one or the other,
Mm-hmm.
and they're creating these sort of like artificial, man-made, burnt forests. So it's like, but when you get into the work, it's like you can see the individual objects again, and you can see where the materials are coming from. But it's really foreboding, when you
Right.
look at it, of like a possible future.
Mm-hmm. Um, I think we've already touched on one of the other questions I kind of brought up, which is basically about how you think differently when it comes to making your sculptures, as opposed to your 2D pieces. Because I
Mm-hmm.
kind of talked about how they're both visually dense, but they both play with space in very specific ways.
Mm-hmm. I used to think of the drawings as, I don't know. The drawings were always more important to me
Oh, okay.
um, than the sculptures. And I think in some ways it's shifted now in my work where the sculpture is coming before the drawing. So in the past, I would always make, these drawings that are kind of fantasy-like.
Hmm.
They're sometimes defying gravity. They're obviously piles of things or like piles of objects that are stuck together and floating in a space. Actually, like there's one, I don't know if you can see it
Yeah, I
in my
can.
office right now. So this is a really good example of like the older drawings.
Hmm.
And then I would, inspired by the drawings, I would make these sculptures and installations. I never thought of them as sculptures, actually. I thought of them more as collage, just
Hmm.
large scale, because I never thought of myself as a sculptor. Um, like I'm really a 2D drawing painting person. And so only recently do I feel like I know what I'm doing when I'm making 3-dimensional things. So it's been like an interesting evolution. But I definitely think of the sculptures and the drawings differently. Originally, like the piece that I did at the Dishman, that
Hmm.
was the house with a tornado of objects coming out the roof, really to me felt like a cartoon of the drawing. Like the drawing somehow was more real.
See, that's so interesting. I wouldn't.
Yeah, and the real thing that was physical was more of a illustration of an idea, not as realistic.
Uh-huh.
Um, I mean, the work I'm doing now, I'm still making drawings, but the drawings are more. They're not so much the piles of objects, although sometimes you see that. They're more emotional, and because I'm working with this poet, and so I'm reading her poems, and then I'm making these automatic drawings based on them, where I'm just drawing from my imagination and not referencing anything.
Mhm.
But then I'm building these totems, like these charred black trees,
Yeah, I saw those
basically.
online, and now that you say that they're trees, I'm like, okay. It's like, you kind of see, you look at them and they're very tall, very skinny.
Mhm.
So I kind of got like the totem aspect, but the tree thing totally changes your perspective a little bit. Um,
Yeah, they're kind of like, I mean, they're not real trees, right? They're symbolic or metaphor for a forest. But
mhm.
I'm thinking of this like future forest where everything's covered in tar or oil, or things are charred. like it's this kind of really apocalyptic like future.
Mhm.
But but they're made out of like to-go cartons
Mhm.
and cardboard and plastic and recyclables. Mostly recyclables is what they're made of. So they work on a lot of different levels, and they're like 12 foot tall, so they're larger than human scale. And yeah, I don't know. They also have sound with them.
Oh, okay.
There's a sound component where West is reading her poems about fossil fuels. I don't know. So it's just a little more narrative, maybe a little. It's similar to the work that I did at the Dishman, but a little
Mhm.
bit darker. And I giggle. I don't know why.
Um, I get it.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's so interesting that you're kind of working with this component of poetry now.
Mm.
Is it actually like a recording of her reading the poetry?
So when I'm making the drawings, I'm just reading the
Just
poems.
reading the poems. Okay.
And then responding to them. And her work's amazing.
Mhm.
It's super evocative. I mean, I love poetry anyway. I'm like,
Right. And I always feel like poetry is one of the most like visual of the like
mhm,
written
mhm.
styles. So I think that that's really cool that you're kind of working with someone else and like working that into like an inspiration based jumping point from whatever you're creating now.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to look at an image because I have a couple.
Yeah.
I could share my screen really quick or a window. Because I find it fascinating. I have always been an artist that's worked on my own,
Hmm.
like in a very solitary way,
Uh-huh.
like secret in my studio. Um, and so to work with someone, I mean, her own work is amazing. Um, it's just such a interesting experience. But these are some of those automatic drawings I was telling you about.
Hmm.
Um, and let's see here. So they're just India ink drawings on Yupo paper, which is a synthetic paper that was engineered for watercolor. And so it does a lot of interesting resist and these kind of weird patterns that it makes. And but I've also been writing out the poems. So this one, for instance, is maybe 9 feet across,
Wow.
about 7 feet tall. So sometimes what I'll do too is I'll write the poem out. I'll draw it out with my brush onto the paper and I'll erase it and redraw it and like do that over and over again. It's hard to tell here. I don't know if I have a detail, but here's some other versions. So sometimes I'm literally just writing the poems out and making those drawings, and then sometimes I'm drawing the imagery in the poem.
I love
But
that.
I'm just having a great time kind of working with someone else's content. I mean, I'm still obviously making my work.
Hmm.
The images come from me, but I love having this external reference, I guess.
Hmm. Um, so when did you start this project? I'm curious.
I it was all of 2020. I did start it before the pandemic.
Uh-huh.
I asked her to work with me um, in 2019, like the end of or middle of 2019. I guess it was the summer that I started working with her. And so then I work, I guess, through fall 19 and then all through 2020. And then we had a show in October, which, these are those trees I was telling you about. So this was all part of that same exhibit. Trees, I don't know. Totems is a better term. I like that term more, but they do have this sort of forest quality.
Right. They remind me of those like Italian like pine trees.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Totally.
Um, this is just so interesting. So, okay. In working with someone else, which is already different, but working with someone else through the pandemic,
Mm.
how do you think I mean, do you think that that definitely helped you in any way? Just from the fact that things were so cut off over the past year. Um, do you think that that helped you kind of get through? I know that sometimes it is challenging to work with others, but um, it can be nice to kind of have like a tennis court sort of system. And I'm
Mhm.
wondering how that um, affected you, especially last year.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that there were a couple things that helped. I mean, one was having Sasha to work with, someone that I could bounce ideas off of as well. So,
Mhm.
again, I was still working alone in my studio, but she was there in spirit.
Right.
And then I would show her something when I felt confident enough. And then luckily she liked what I was doing. Because that's always nerve wracking when you're trying to collaborate with someone,
Right.
and do justice to their work and not, you know, I didn't ever want to represent her work in a way that she was not comfortable with,
Mhm.
and so that challenge was great to have during the pandemic. I think that honestly, without it, I probably wouldn't have been as productive as I've been. It's really hard to make work,
Right.
even though we have all this time.
Mhm.
I feel like I have more time that I could have spent at my studio, but it's just hard.
Right. Right. It's been
um,
uh, it's been really interesting. We started making these videos a year ago, since last April. I got to interact with so many people, and kind of take this survey with everyone where I get to get everyone's different perspective, people who work in every kind of medium, really, and just kind of gauge where everyone was at. And then personally as well. And this past year, I made more than I ever made. Like, it kind of like I worked in like waves where I wouldn't touch something for like 3 whole weeks, and then I would fly through it, or I would work on one thing for a very, very long time slowly.
mhm.
Um, so it's just been very interesting getting everyone's perspective.
Yeah, I feel really lucky. We didn't cancel our show, but we postponed it
Mhm.
multiple times. So it was postponed twice during the pandemic. It was supposed to open in March.
Oh,
It
wow.
was
Okay.
right when everything just closed down.
Yeah.
And so I had already rented a truck to move my pieces and, reserved a hotel room and all this stuff. And um, ended up canceling it all and postponing till August. Of course, then August came, and we were like, let's postpone it a little longer and see what happens, because it's just so hard to tell.
Right.
Um, and then, at that point, I was like, let's just do it.
Mhm.
Even though there weren't a lot of people on campus. It was at Texas A&M College Station.
Oh, okay.
But people did see the show, and we did, like a Zoom event, and I
Mhm.
got photos. And I was really thankful that I had the exhibit, and we just did it, because art needs to happen, right?
Right.
Whether we are masked or distanced or
Mhm.
remote. It's like we just need to keep making and doing stuff. So
It,
I feel lucky that I had that show, and that we were able to eventually like install it.
mhm. and 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 for a lot of things, especially with what your work is centering around, it kind of makes sense that it would happen in this particular moment that everyone is experiencing,
Mm-hmm.
because it kind of has a lot to do with that. I mean, we're in this
Mm-hmm.
situation because
Yeah, it
of
was
the history.
particularly poignant for a lot of viewers.
Right.
Like people really responded well to it.
Mhm.
People that could experience it. I actually kind of, I mean, I've made other work between these bodies. Like I did a lot. I have a really difficult project that I've worked on a little bit about the prison system and police brutality, but it's just really hard work.
It is. I mean,
Um,
it's got to be emotionally, well, yeah.
yeah, much harder than the environmental work, which um, is not just about the environment, but again, it's very personal to me. And it has, like you said, multiple layers of meaning, and
Mhm.
I come to it through all these different lenses as well. And it satisfies me in so many different ways, making it too. But this other work is just so much harder because it's real people and their lives and the prison system, and there's just a lot of injustice and
Right.
so complicated. It's so hard.
Uh, I totally understand. And I guess I can relate to that a little bit too because it's been really interesting. In the past, I was one to shut myself off from those experiences just because um, I can get like really affected and it's really hard for me to like process those things.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something that I've been trying to be more brave about this past year, especially in reading more work with those kinds of stories, both fiction and nonfiction,
Mm.
um, putting my focus on visual work with those kinds of topics, and just kind of having those conversations with friends, and internally as well. We just watched Promising Young Woman.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
Oh my God,
It's
Hollis.
good.
Hollis, that was the
I have to
most
write it down.
like poetic justice filled movie that I've ever seen. Like honestly, it was everything. It could be my favorite movie of the year, and I watch a lot of movies, and we're only in like March, so you should watch it.
Okay, I'll check it out.
Definitely. I get inspired by movies a lot, so
I mean, I think that this year, it's been more than a year now, right?
right.
Just barely, is going to be like so memorable in so many ways,
Mhm.
good and bad. There's and a lot of good has happened this year. A lot of bad things have happened as well,
Also,
equally.
this week has been a hard hitter.
But I do think there's something about being in the pandemic where we're all really attuned to the news and trying to understand what's going on, that we have started to deal with these issues that we haven't been dealing with for decades, centuries. um, it's so I think, yeah, there's some interesting stuff that will come out of this historically beyond just the pandemic and all of the stuff related to that. There's all these other tangential issues.
Definitely. I'm really excited to see all the work that gets shown after this weird period because I don't want to say when things go back to normal because I don't think that's ever going to happen again.
Mm-hmm.
But once we're able to go out in public again, I'm really excited to see all of the work that's been being made at this time because I think it's going to be, like you said, a very memorable time in recorded history and in a creative aspect and every aspect really.
Yeah, I mean, even economically,
Right.
when you're in an economic downturn, like what comes after that often is the opposite. So, hopefully things will get financially better for people, and
Right.
it could be like a renaissance, moment
Well, it's been so nice getting to catch up with you.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for inviting me. Okay, well, thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks for
no problem.
inviting me.
Thank you. I hope you have a good rest of your afternoon.
Okay, talk to you later.
Okay, bye.
Bye.